Okay, so for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at some pretty amazing stuff
Yeah.
from a recent Joe Rogan experience with Ben Lamm.
Hmm.
And this is all about colossal biosciences and the world of de-extinction.
Yes. So kind of like a real life Jurassic Park.
It really is kind of a Jurassic Parky kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Ben Lamm himself,
Yeah. Yeah.
CEO and co-founder,
Hmm.
not a biologist by
Yeah.
trade, but like software, team building, that sort of thing.
That's right. He has a very strong tech background,
Yeah.
um, which kind of makes you wonder how he got involved in all this.
Well, that's what I think is so interesting about it is that you've got this guy from that world,
Yeah.
and then he hooks up with George Church.
Right. Dr. George Church, who's sometimes called the father of synthetic biology
Yeah.
over at Harvard.
That's right. And this guy's like 6'7", and he has narcolepsy. So
Yeah. What a fascinating
it's
person.
like an incredible figure to be this sort of the mad scientist behind all of this.
Yeah. He seems like a really interesting guy. And so Lamm actually got into it because he was interested in synthetic biology, just more broadly.
Yeah.
And they were talking.
Yeah.
And Church just casually mentions that he's working on bringing back the woolly mammoth.
He's like, oh, by the way.
Yeah, just as an aside.
Yeah, I'm working on bringing back the woolly mammoth. And Lamb's like, you're kidding, right? Like, this is a joke.
Yeah, he said he thought it was a fucking joke.
That's right. He thought it was a joke. And then so that night, he goes and like reads everything he can about George Church.
Right.
And finds out, no, this is something that he's been really interested in and thinking about and working on for like 8 years.
That's right, for about 8 years.
And then like a week later, he's in his lab.
Yeah, he went right over to the lab.
And they're starting this company.
Yeah, incredible.
So, okay, so that's how we get to colossal biosciences. Now let's talk about why the woolly mammoth, like, why did they pick that as their starting point?
So there were a few reasons. For one thing, Church had already been kind of tinkering with this idea for about 8 years. So there was some preliminary research to work off of.
Okay.
They also thought that they could use the same technology to help with elephant conservation down the line.
Okay.
And also there were a bunch of ecological models that suggested that reintroducing mammoths to the Arctic could actually have a really positive impact on the environment.
So it wasn't just like, oh, this would be cool.
Yeah.
It was really strategic. Like, there's existing work.
Yes.
And there's some very clear potential benefits.
Right.
And then when they announced the company, it just blew up online.
It did. Yeah, it went completely viral. And then they started getting all these other researchers contacting them, people working on other extinct species and wanting to work with them.
Like what are some of the...
So the thylacine.
Okay, the Tasmanian tiger.
Mm-hmm. The Tasmanian tiger.
Yeah.
And the dodo.
Oh, wow.
Are two of the big ones.
Okay, so it really expanded from there.
It really broadened their scope.
Okay, so we've got the why, the who.
Yeah.
Now we got to get into the how.
Okay.
So how do you even start to bring back an animal that's been extinct for thousands of years?
Right, so the first thing you need is DNA.
Yeah.
And ancient DNA is really, really fragile.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it basically starts degrading
Yeah.
right after an organism dies. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces.
Yeah. Okay.
So you have to get a ton of samples,
Okay.
and even then, the quality is not great.
But Colossal has like, I think Lamm said 109 mammoth samples or something like that.
Yeah, they do. They have a huge collection.
Yeah.
109 mammoth samples.
Yeah.
And some of them are like 3,000 years old, and some are over 1 million years old.
Wow, that's a huge range.
It is a really impressive collection, but it's not like a complete genetic sequence or anything like that.
Right.
Lamm described it as a shitty jigsaw puzzle
That's a good way to put
with
it.
lots of missing pieces and contamination from bacteria and fungi and stuff.
Yeah, so you've got these tiny little fragments, and you're trying to piece them together.
Exactly.
And then you've got all this other genetic material that you have to sift through to figure out like what's mammoth and what's not.
Right.
So this is where like the computing problem comes in.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You need a lot of computing power and really sophisticated AI algorithms to assemble all these fragments and to figure out what goes where and to fill in the gaps.
Wow. So it's not just about finding the DNA. It's about processing it and making sense of it.
That's right.
Okay, so let's say you've managed to put together a good chunk of this ancient DNA puzzle. What's the next step?
So you need to compare it to the genome of the closest living relative to get some kind of reference point.
Okay.
And in the case of the woolly mammoth, that's the Asian elephant.
Oh, that's interesting because, when you think about mammoths, you think about elephants in general.
Right.
But I would have thought maybe it would have been the African elephant.
Yeah, a lot of people think that, But it turns out that Asian elephants are actually more closely related to mammoths than they are to African elephants.
Wow, that's crazy.
It is pretty amazing.
And another thing that Lamm said that really blew my mind was that woolly mammoths were still around when humans were building the pyramids in Egypt.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, that just changes your whole perspective of them, you know?
Right. Like they're not these super ancient creatures from like the dinosaur age.
Yeah, it's not like 65 million years ago. It's like,
Right.
pretty recent.
Yeah, they were around much more recently than most people realize.
So when did the last mammoths actually die out?
The last ones died out about 4,000 years ago on Wrangel Island.
4,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is northeast of Siberia.
That's not that long ago.
No, it's not.
What happened to them there?
Well, it seems like there were a few things that contributed to their extinction on Wrangel Island. There was probably a lot of inbreeding going on.
Okay.
Because it was a relatively small population. So they had less genetic diversity, which made them more vulnerable.
Yeah.
And the island also had limited resources, so that probably played a role too.
Okay.
And there was another place where mammoths survived for a pretty long time too. St. Paul Island, which is between Alaska and Russia.
Oh, wow.
So it seems like islands were kind of like the last holdouts for mammoths.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to ask about getting these ancient DNA samples.
Yeah.
It sounds like it must be quite an adventure.
It is definitely not easy.
I mean, Lamm told that story about the researcher in Fairbanks who was like super protective of his mammoth remains.
Oh, yeah, he did. Yeah. That guy was not willing to share his samples.
Yeah.
But he was open to collaboration if they worked in his lab.
That's so funny.
It is kind of funny, but it also shows how seriously people take their research and their discoveries.
Of course.
But yeah, it's not always easy to get access to the samples you need.
Yeah. Right. And then there's that crazy story about finding woolly mammoth and steppe bison fragments right here in the East River, New York City.
Yeah, that's pretty wild, isn't it?
That's insane.
Yeah. I mean, it really makes you think about how different this landscape used to be.
Right. These giant creatures were just roaming around here.
Exactly.
And now it's just concrete and skyscrapers.
Yeah. It's amazing to think about.
And Lamm also made this interesting point about how there are all these specimens just sitting in museum basements around the world.
Oh, yeah, he did. Yeah, he said it's like the Vatican archives of the natural world.
The Vatican archives, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, like giant sloth poop that could have DNA in it.
Oh, wow.
Drawers with Darwin's name on them. It's incredible.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and the story of the thylacine genome is a perfect example of that.
Mm-hmm.
They found this miracle pup.
Yeah, 98% complete genome from a specimen they didn't even know they had.
Right, they didn't even realize how important it was, and then they found the mother's head in a bucket.
In a bucket.
Yeah, just sitting in a bucket.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing story.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to get a 99.9% complete genome by comparing the two.
Wow, so these museum collections are like treasure troves of genetic information.
They really are. Yeah, there's so much potential there.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the thylacine a little bit more, because I know there are still people out there who believe they might exist.
Right. There are a lot of rumors and reported sightings.
Yeah.
But Dr. Andrew Pask, who's leading the thylacine de-extinction effort at Colossal, he's been testing all these alleged sightings for the last 15 years.
Wow.
And so far, none of them have turned out to be real.
So no scat samples, no hair, nothing.
Nothing conclusive, yeah.
Okay, so the official extinction date is 1936.
Yeah.
But you're saying they probably lasted a bit longer than that.
Yeah, they probably hung on until the late 40s or early 50s.
Wow.
But Dr. Pask is pretty skeptical about any recent sightings.
Okay, but what about people like Forrest Galante, who thinks there might still be thylacines in Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, so Galante's argument is based on the fact that Western Papua New Guinea is extremely remote and rugged.
Okay.
And he thinks there could be a small, isolated population hiding out there.
Okay.
He also points out that there are no Papuan singing dogs in that part of the island.
Singing dogs.
Yeah, it's a type of wild dog that's known for its unique howl.
Wow.
Lamm actually described them as opera singers.
Opera singers.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Wow, that's crazy. So
Yeah.
they can hold a tune.
Yeah, they can really hold it too.
That's wild. Okay, so back to the de-extinction process. Once you've got the ancient DNA and you've compared it to the closest living relative,
Yeah.
what happens next?
So then you start building comparative genomic models.
Okay.
So for the Mammoth Project, they're using the Asian elephant genome as the main template.
Okay. And I have to admit, like, coming from a tech background, I kind of assumed there would be like a Google cloud of DNA for like every species. You
Right,
know?
like a universal database.
Yeah, exactly. But it turns out that doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't.
That's crazy.
It is kind of crazy considering how much genetic data we have these days.
Right.
But Colossal is actually petitioning the U.S. government to create a national biobank.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they want to start with American megafauna and keystone species.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and in the meantime, they've had to build their own reference genomes for the species they're working on.
So it's a huge undertaking.
It is a massive project.
Okay, so now we've got the ancient DNA and we've got the reference genome.
Yeah. How do we actually get from that to a living, breathing animal?
Right, so this is where synthetic biology and gene editing come in,
Good.
specifically CRISPR.
Yeah, CRISPR.
So you don't really need a 100% complete ancient genome.
Okay.
You can use CRISPR to fill in the gaps.
How does that work?
So CRISPR is basically like molecular scissors.
Molecular scissors.
Yeah,
Like
you can
that.
program it to target specific DNA sequences and cut them, and then you can insert new genes or even just make single letter changes.
Wow, so it's like editing code? It's exactly like editing code.
That's amazing. And this is how they made the woolly mice, right?
That's right. Yeah, the woolly mice were a proof of concept.
Okay, so they didn't set out to make like a miniature mammoth.
Right.
They wanted to see if they could actually use CRISPR to create a mammoth-like trait in another animal.
Exactly.
And they chose mice because...
Well, for a few reasons. Mice are much easier to work with than elephants, ethically and practically.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to start messing around with elephant genes
Right.
without testing it out in a smaller animal first.
Exactly. And mice have a much shorter gestation period,
Okay.
only about 20 days compared to almost 2 years for an elephant.
Wow.
So you can get results much faster.
So how did the woolly mice turn out?
They were a huge success. They created 36 healthy mice with woolly-like hair.
36 mice.
Yeah.
And they were all healthy.
And they achieved 100% efficiency in multiplex editing.
What does that mean?
It means they're able to edit multiple genes at the same time in a single generation,
Oh, wow.
which is a big improvement over traditional gene editing, which usually focuses on one gene at a time.
So this is a huge step forward.
It is a major advance in gene editing technology.
And they did all kinds of testing to make sure that the CRISPR edits didn't have any unintended consequences, right?
Oh, yeah. They did a ton of screening to make sure there were no off-target effects.
Okay, good.
And they're also certified by the American Humane Society. So they're really committed to animal welfare.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, they're not just cowboys.
Okay, so the woolly mice were a success.
Yeah.
But what are some of the other ways that they're testing out these genetic modifications?
So they're using a lot of DNA sequencing
Okay.
to make sure that the edits are correct.
Right.
And obviously, the ultimate test will be when they actually create a mammoth.
Right.
But that's still a ways off.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, they've been working with induced pluripotent stem cells.
Okay, what are those?
So those are adult cells that have been reprogrammed back into an embryonic-like state. And you can basically turn them into any type of cell you want.
Oh, wow.
So they've actually been able to grow mammoth hair follicles in petri dishes.
Mammoth hair follicles.
Yeah, extinct mammoth hair growing in a lab.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Okay, and for the thylacine project, they're using the fat-tailed dunnart as their model organism?
That's right. Yeah, it's a small marsupial that has a gestation period of only 13.5 days.
Wow, that's even shorter than the mouse.
Yeah, it is.
And why did they choose that one?
Well, it's more closely related to the thylacine than a mouse is.
Okay.
So it's a better model for testing out the genetic modifications they need to make.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not all about de-extinction though, right?
No, they're also doing a lot of work on conservation.
Yeah.
They started by creating a population genomics map for American bison
Okay.
to see how much genetic diversity they have and if there are any problems with inbreeding.
Okay, and that led to a conversation with Chairman Fox from the MHA Nation.
It did, yeah. They talked about a bunch of different conservation needs.
Yeah, wolves, bison, eagles, fish.
Yeah, a whole range of species.
That's right, and there was that story about Chairman Fox pointing to a picture of a white wolf.
Oh, yeah, the great wolf, he called
The
it.
great wolf, that's right, and he mentioned that some people believe it could have been a dire wolf.
Yeah, like the ones from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly. That's so cool.
It is pretty cool.
And then there was that meeting in North Carolina where they learned about the red wolf.
Yeah, the red wolf is critically endangered.
Yeah, there are only like 15 left in the wild or something like that.
Yeah, it's a really dire situation.
And it's the only wolf that's native to America.
That's right.
Wow. So it sounds like they've really expanded their focus.
They have, yeah, they're not just focused on bringing back extinct animals anymore.
They're also trying to save existing ones.
Exactly.
And it sounds like they've been getting a lot of support from the public.
Yeah, they have. They've been getting tons of emails and drawings from kids.
Kids are obsessed with this stuff.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, who doesn't love the idea of bringing back dinosaurs? Not dinosaurs,
Fine,
mammoths and
Hey, listen,
saber-toothed tigers and,
Yes.
and all that.
it's really captured the public imagination.
It really has. And then they've got people from Hollywood getting involved.
Yeah.
Tom Brady?
Yeah, Tom Brady's an investor.
Yeah, and he's not the only one.
No, there are a lot of big names involved.
Okay, so back to the direwolf.
Okay.
They're really interested in bringing that back.
They are, yeah. They think it would be a huge win for conservation,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be a really cool way to engage the public.
Yeah. I mean, everyone loves wolves.
Yeah.
And especially direwolves.
Especially dire wolves.
Okay, but the problem is they don't have any frozen direwolf carcasses.
Right. There are no dire wolves in permafrost.
So where are they getting the DNA from?
So most of the dire wolf remains come from the La Brea tar pits.
Okay, yeah.
But the DNA in those remains is pretty much useless.
Because of the tar.
Yeah, the heat and the acidity of the tar basically destroyed the DNA.
Okay.
But then they found a tooth in a cave
Okay.
that was about 13,000 years old.
Okay.
And they were able to get a little bit of DNA from that, but it wasn't enough to really work with.
Okay.
But then a couple of years ago, they found a dire wolf skull in a riverbed.
A skull.
Yeah, a whole skull.
And it wasn't in permafrost or tar.
No, it was just in a riverbed.
Wow, that's lucky.
It was incredibly lucky.
Mm.
It was about 72,000 years old.
72,000 years old.
Yeah, and it was in an amazing condition.
Ah.
And they were able to get a ton of DNA from the petrous bone.
The petrous bone, what's that?
It's a bone in the inner ear,
Okay.
and it's really good at preserving DNA.
Oh, okay.
So they were able to get 13 to 14 times coverage of the genome.
Wow, so that's enough to work with.
Yeah, that's plenty.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible.
Okay, so they're bringing back mammoths, they're bringing back thylacines, they're bringing back dire wolves.
Mhm.
I mean, it's huge.
It is huge.
I mean, what do people think about all this?
Well, there are definitely some ethical concerns.
Yeah, I bet.
Lamm said he's been getting grilled by reporters
Yeah.
who accuse him of playing God.
Playing God, yeah, that's a big one.
It is a big one.
So what's his response to that?
So he basically says that humans have been altering nature for centuries.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, we've cut down forests, we've overfished the oceans, we drink hydrogenated water.
Yeah, that's true.
So he's saying that de-extinction is just another way that we're shaping the natural world.
Okay, but isn't it different?
Well, he argues that rewilding can actually be really beneficial for the environment.
Okay.
He used the example of wolves in Yellowstone,
Okay.
how they changed the river systems and brought back the beavers.
Right, I've heard about that.
Yeah, so he's saying that bringing back extinct species could have similar positive effects.
Okay, but what about the potential negative impacts? Like, what if these reintroduced predators start causing problems?
Well, he addressed that too. He talked about the wolf reintroduction in Colorado
Okay.
and how there were some issues with livestock.
Yeah.
But he says that those problems were caused by poor planning and management,
Okay.
not by the wolves themselves.
So he's saying that if we do it right,
Yeah,
it can actually be a good thing.
exactly.
Okay, so this is all pretty mind-blowing,
It is.
but it gets even crazier.
What do you mean?
They've actually created dire wolves.
They have.
Yes. As of the Joe Rogan interview, they have 3 dire wolves.
Wow.
2 males and 1 female.
That's incredible.
I know, and Peter Jackson was so moved by hearing them howl.
Really?
Yeah, he's an investor in Colossal.
I know.
And he just happened to buy the Iron Throne prop from Game of Thrones
Wow.
right before the wolves had their first vet checkup.
What a coincidence.
Yeah, it's like a cosmic coincidence.
That's amazing.
And the American Humane Society was there for the checkup,
Oh, good.
along with a bunch of vets and animal care professionals.
That's reassuring.
Yeah, so they're taking good care of these animals.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, and the wolves are living on a 2,000-acre secure ecological preserve.
2,000 acres. Wow.
Yeah, it's huge.
That's amazing.
They're not being released into the wild.
Okay.
They're getting 2047 care, and they have a built-in animal hospital.
Wow. So they're really being pampered.
Yeah, they are.
That's great.
So at 3 months old, they weighed over 45 pounds.
45 pounds.
Yeah, and by 5 months, they were up to 80 pounds and about 5.5 feet long.
Wow, they're growing fast.
Yeah, they're still growing too.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and from the fossil record, we knew that dire wolves were bigger and stockier than gray wolves.
Right.
But the genomic data has revealed something really interesting.
What's that?
They were probably white.
White?
Yeah.
I thought they were like reddish brown.
Well, that was the theory based on the limited fossil evidence.
Oh, okay.
But the genome suggests that they were actually white.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, and Lamm has observed them exhibiting some really cool behaviors.
Like what?
Well, they're really playful. But they're also showing signs of hunting instincts.
Really?
Yeah, even though they're not hunting for food yet.
So it's like those ancient genes are kicking in.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Make incredible.
And they're hoping to create a stable social pack.
Okay.
So they can study their behavior in a more natural environment.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and the fact that they have both a 13,000-year-old tooth and a 73,000-year-old skull means they can really pinpoint the truly conserved genes that define a dire wolf.
Right, so they can distinguish between the core genetic traits and the variations that might have popped up in later populations.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and Lamm was actually bottle feeding Romulus.
Oh.
I know, it's so cute.
Yeah.
But he said he had to stop because the wolves were getting too wild.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they had to limit human contact so they wouldn't lose their natural instincts.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And they're keeping the location of the preserve secret.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
Well, for the safety of the animals and the public.
Right? I mean, people are going to be going crazy trying to find these things.
Exactly, especially after all the attention the woolly mice got.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so obviously there's some big ethical questions here.
There are. Yeah, a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of de-extinction.
Yeah, I can see that.
They think it's unnatural or even sacrilegious.
Playing God again.
Right, playing God.
So how does Lamm address those concerns?
So he basically says that the concept of a species is a human construct.
A human construct.
Yeah, like nature doesn't really recognize species boundaries in the same way that we do.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and he says that the goal of de-extinction is to restore ecological roles and biodiversity.
So it's not just about bringing back individual animals.
Right, it's about restoring balance to the ecosystem.
Okay. And he also said that a lot of the scientists who criticize Colossal's work get really hung up on the definition of a species and how much ancient DNA is enough.
Right.
Like they'll say, oh, you need 99.9% of the genome, or it's not really the same species, but then they'll turn around and use a different definition.
Right, it's like they're moving the goalposts.
Exactly. So it seems like there's a bit of a double standard.
There does seem to be, yeah.
And Lamm acknowledges that there's a lot of skepticism from traditional biologists, like, what are you doing?
Right.
But he says that we need to be bold and take risks.
Yeah.
He says this is different from Jurassic Park.
How so?
Well, in Jurassic Park, it was all about entertainment.
Right.
But Colossal is focused on conservation.
Yeah, they want to use these technologies for good.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
And they're committed to making all their technologies freely available for conservation efforts.
Really?
Yeah. So even if they don't succeed in bringing back the mammoth or the thylacine, the technologies they develop could still be used to save other endangered species.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really important point.
It is.
Okay, so we talked about the red wolf earlier. It's critically endangered.
It is.
There are only like 15 left in the wild.
That's right.
But Colossal has some good news.
What's that?
They've cloned red wolves.
They have?
Yeah, they've created 4 of them.
Wow.
From 3 different genetic lines.
So they actually have more genetic diversity than the wild population.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and they used a new non-invasive cloning technology.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they used endothelial progenitor cells from blood samples.
So they didn't have to do any invasive procedures.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and they're making this technology open source.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it could revolutionize species preservation.
It really could.
But they had a bit of a frustrating experience with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
What happened?
So they offered them the cloned red wolves and the technology.
Okay.
And the Fish and Wildlife Service basically said, we need to do a 5 to 6 year study.
Oh, wow.
That's going to cost $22 million.
$22 million.
Yeah, to determine if cloning wolves is even possible.
But they've already done it. That's
Exactly.
ridiculous.
I know, it's so frustrating. But
Yeah.
the Department of the Interior was much more receptive.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they were really excited about the potential of this technology.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah, so they're working with them to reintroduce the cloned red wolves.
That's great.